Local consumer inflation has been rising over the past 2 years, spiking sharply in 2022 following a global trend that was made worse by the Russia-Ukraine conflict. After 4 consecutive months of a steady decline in the year-on-year inflation rate, February surprised with average inflation turning up again, rising by 7%, driven in the main by higher food prices as well as housing and transport, among other factors. And while average inflation rose by 6.9% in 2022, wages have not kept pace with inflation, denting the pockets of more financially vulnerable consumers.
I would say that your lower end consumer is typically facing a higher rate of inflation. When we saw the February numbers coming out from Statistics South Africa on headline inflation, we actually saw that the low end was facing inflation of 10.1% in year-on-year terms. So that's the bottom 30% of income earners in South Africa facing inflation north of 10% on the back of high food inflation, which of course makes a much bigger proportion of their basket. At your upper end, and I would say your top 30% of income earners in South Africa, typically facing inflation just slightly below 7%. And so you're going to really see that difference coming through. And as a result, your real wage.
The Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity's Household Food Basket Index for March showed that a basket of 44 basic commodities that the majority of South Africans buy, that it surveys, came to 4,963 rand and 20 cents. That's a rise of 38 rand relative to February, with an annual increase of 516 rand, which translates to an 11.6% hike. And the index noted price increments right across the basket of food surveyed.
For instance, on maize meal, which is a staple South African food, we now have a 26% increase on the price it was a year ago. When we look, for instance, at cake flour, it's 20% more expensive now than a year ago. The same applies to sugar, is about 7%. Cooking oil, even though it has been coming down from the highs of 2 years ago, it still is about 16% more expensive. When we look, for instance, at potatoes, which is another staple, potatoes are 52% more expensive this year than it was a year ago, and onions 67%.
Given the high levels of unemployment and even the phenomenon of the working poor, civil society organizations are very concerned that millions of South Africans are potentially going to bed hungry for a lack of resources to buy basic food. And they're pointing to an increase in the rate of stunting in physical growth and malnutrition, particularly in children.
Stunting and malnutrition not only has an immediate effect on the misery of the child, but it also has a permanent effect in terms of that child's development potential. So children who can't concentrate at school, who drop out of school and become unemployed, invariably that goes back to a delay or a halting in their own developmental potential, their cognitive potential.
The Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group has warned that a grimmer picture has yet to emerge for poorer households, noting the 18.65% increase in energy prices that kicked in this month for Eskom customers and yet to take effect for municipality consumers in July, and noted that given households' priorities, they'll have increasingly less to play with to buy the basics.
And households also tell us that they prioritize 3 things in their budget. The first is transport, and there we've seen increases. The second area of priority is electricity, and there we will see an 18% increase. The third area that they prioritize is debt servicing, whether it is in the formal sector or informal sector, because after 2 weeks, money runs out. To survive, they then have to get a loan in order just to buy food. So if they don't repay their debt, then of course that means they can't continue. So that's a third area of priority, and only then do they buy food.
The social grant system has also been criticised for not giving out cash transfers that are based on a needs assessment, noting that the child support as well as the social relief of distress grants, for example, are below the food poverty line of 663 rand.
While we're recognising people have need, and so we're handing out formal cash transfers, they in no way meet people's basic needs. And so what we have is a slow and very painful starvation of people who are just not meeting their basic needs. the impact that has on society is multifold and very destructive. It destroys people's ability to take charge of their lives.
As inflation continues to erode South Africans' incomes, especially the unemployed and lowly paid, 2023 is expected to be a tough financial year for many. And with the Reserve Bank also likely to continue with its rate hiking mission to combat inflation, ironically, this will also increase the burden for heavily indebted consumers. Nompumelelo, Siziba, SABC News, Johannesburg.